Hey there, Insider family. It's Cindy Thomas here, your career coach and strategist. The Insiders Career Club is starting their 5th season of podcasts, career podcasts. Now, most of you know that I was in talent acquisition and recruiting for many, many years. The bulk of my career was spent there. I'm going to use that background in that area to speak with my guests about their careers, and they're going to share their career paths with you, along with some of the career options that are available in that particular field. I'm also going to share trending career information with you for those particular things that are going to impact your career. So we have got an impressive slate of guests lined up for this season. So stay tuned. Coming up next is a great guest. Our special guest today is Hajim. He's a seasoned Wall Street executive. He's held senior management positions with Capital Group, E.F. Hutton and Lehman Brothers before becoming chairman and CEO of Furman Seltz. Now, these are just a few of his many achievements. He's also written 2 books. The first one is titled On the Road Less Traveled, An Unlikely Journey from the Orphanage to the Boardroom. It tells the story of how Ed, the son of a Syrian immigrant, bounced from foster homes to orphanages in a daily struggle to survive, to living the American dream. His second book is called The Island of the Four Ps, and it's a modern fable about preparing for your future. Let's learn more about these books and Ed's history as well as his full life story. Let's welcome him into the show. Good morning, Ed. Welcome to the Insiders Career Club podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a wonderful day here.
Great. We've got good weather. It's still a little chilly for us. I'm in California, so yeah. So why don't we start with you talking about where you are now with your career, and then walk us back and describe, how you got to where you are.
Well, I've now made a major pivot. I spent a bit of almost 60 years on Wall Street. And in 1972, 50 years in Wall Street, 1972, I decided to take the job as the chairman of the board of trustees at the University of Rochester.
Oh, okay.
I made a pivot, basically away from work into, what I call community, giving back. I'd spent 20 years as a trustee, and I spent 8 years as the chairman, and we had a very unusual period. We raised as much money as they raised the previous 150 years, and we added almost $1 billion worth of new buildings and more new programs, scholarships, and professorships than ever in the history of the school. During that period, I had to expose who I was. I had buried my background for most of my life. In fact, even my wife didn't know the full story. I grew up in orphanages and foster homes and so forth, but I had buried that when I was 18 years old.
Oh, okay.
And when the story started to come out, my wife, my children, and the school wanted to know much more about me. So they said, why don't you write a book? And I started to write a book. And I wrote one book, which was a sort of an autobiography. Then I sat down and actually wrote an autobiography.
Wow.
Both books have been published. One is called On the Road Less Traveled, which is my autobiography, which came out in 2020. And then a second book, which was written first, is called The Island of the Four Ps, How to Prepare Yourself for Your Future Career. And I do both of these books, and I was going to print them just for my family, but in sending out requests for blurbs, I came back very strong recommendation this be taken public. Mm-hmm. And I'd always been a very private person. It made me quite nervous, but I decided to do it. We had a publisher came in and said he thought it could be publishable, and he published both books. And I've sold about 20,000 books, so the idea that I go public was probably correct. And I've now gone and taken these 2 books, my autobiography and The Island of the Four Ps, and created a course for universities and seniors in high school, freshmen in college and seniors in high school. I have come up with a crusade that says that there are 2 kinds of educations. One is teaches you how to make a living. Second teaches you how to make a life. I think schools do a decent job of the first one, but they do a relatively poor job formally of the second one. And my course approaches this. It approaches basically asking the student, who are you? Where do you want to go? How do you expect to get there? And I ask them to the 4 Ps, find your passions, overused word. Find your principles, find your partners, and then find your plans. And the book is written as a fable, like Gulliver's Travels or Who My Cheese or these kinds of things. So, and I've gotten it, it's been exposed now in 5 schools. One school has actually run, this year's student body was 115 students. Second is making a required course. The third one's using it as part of their English operation, and 2 are in development right now. And I'm exposing to a number of other schools, kind of one at a time, because it requires my help. So essentially, I made a significant pivot just about 15 years ago. I still have, some involvement in Wall Street. I have a few consulting contracts, and until this January, I was the chairman of the board of a money management company in Boston.
Okay.
That's sort of the end of the story. I don't know how much in the beginning of the story you want.
Well, why don't you, I know that, okay, let me start here then. You mentioned that even your wife didn't know your hidden history. So let's start there.
Well, let's start way back then. My father was an immigrant that came over as an infant in 1900 and got fascinated when he was a teenager with a thing called radio, which was a big technology of the time. Mm-hmm. And by the time he was 29, in 1929, he had made a significant amount of money, mostly in the stock market and working for a radio company. Well, between 29 and 33, he lost everything completely, and his mother died, very close to his mother. And he told me once, he said, Ed, I had to decide between committing suicide and driving to California, where they told me the streets were paved with gold. Luckily, he decided on the second alternative. I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
Anyway, he drove to California. On the way, he stopped at a distant cousin's home, and shockingly, he ended up, after a couple of weeks, marrying the 4th of 5 siblings, a young woman, 15 years his junior. And they proceeded to California. When they arrived there, obviously the streets weren't paved with gold, and Dad had trouble finding a job. They said the only happiness they had was my birth 3 years later. But Dad had a lot of demons from losing all his money, and also having a Middle Eastern background, he didn't relate to women as in the modern sense. And 3 years after my birth, my mother was basically fed up and did something people didn't do in 1939. She divorced my father. Wow. And she got custody, and he got $5 a week of alimony and child support and visiting rights on Sunday. So she took me from Los Angeles, where we were living, to St. Louis, where her parents were. She wasn't terribly welcome. Nobody needed 2 more mouths to feed in 1939. Dad came a few Saturdays later, driving 3 days across the country in his Ford Roadster, picked me up on visiting rights, and instead of taking me to a park or taking me to the movies, he basically hopped on Highway 66 and essentially kidnapped me and took me back to Los Angeles. Called my mother and told her not to look for us, or else, quote unquote. And he basically told me subsequently that my mother had died and I would never see her.
Oh.
So for the next 15 years, the first couple of years Dad and I spent together, he was on aboard a ship. He was a radio operator aboard a ship. And I stayed with neighbors. We had no family, neighbors or friends. When the war broke out, he was commissioned commissioned in the Merchant Marines as a radio operator. And I was placed in the Catholic welfare system in California. The next 5 years I spent in 5 Catholic foster homes. They varied between, I would say, cold and abusive to warm and caring. The first one was cold and abusive, and the last one was warm and caring. After the war ended, Dad ended up in the East Coast. I flew across country, a 5-stopper and a DC-10, arrived in New York. We spent the summer in the YMCA on 34th Street. And then when I had to go to school, we ended up at a hotel room in Coney Island while Dad sought land-based work. After a year of frustration, he gave up and went back to sea.
Oh, okay.
Getting his first assignment in the summer of 1947, I was placed with a neighbor lady who decides last minute not to take me. So I spent part of that summer by myself in that hotel room at age 11. So it's kind of
how old were you? It
almost sounds like fiction, but I have letters to prove all this. My father kept every letter, and I kept every letter I wrote him. Come September, the lady decided again not to take me, so he was able to get me into an orphanage in Far Rockaway. And I traded my room by myself in a hotel for a room with 50 other boys. And but the orphanage turned out to be a real plus. It gave me the thing I never had, which was consistency and community. And we were all enrolled in a fine public grammar school, which I did very well in. Unfortunately, I aged out of this particular orphanage at 14, and my father disappeared completely. I didn't find out why for nearly 50 years, and it's a long story. And so I became a ward of the state. And in those days, they could have put you any place, reform school and so forth. So at age 15, luckily, the wonderful social worker lady decided that she'd place me in another orphanage in Yonkers, New York, which was a few blocks from an excellent public high school called Roosevelt High School. And there I came in contact with students that basically all of them, by 80%, went to something called a private college. And I said, that's my ticket. That's going to take me out of the situation. I put my head down. I was a varsity athlete. I did well in math and science. I worked almost every afternoon as a bag boy, a pin setter, a soda jerk, saved money. And in my senior year, I took the three scholarship tests that you could take at those days. They didn't have a lot of scholarships. And I missed the one I thought I was going to get and ended up getting the Naval Scholarship, the NROTC Scholarship, which allowed me to go to I applied to three colleges, Cornell, RPI, and the University of Rochester. University of Rochester was not even the list I knew about. The principal of the high school had basically recommended, but I wanted to go to Cornell. But when I got the scholarship, Cornell required me to take 5 years. They said, with the naval science requirements, you won't be able to fulfill your engineering requirements. And I wanted to be then a chemical engineer. So I'm from the University of Rochester, and it became my first home. With a very rocky start. I came there in a black leather jacket with all the wrong clothes. And the first thing they did in those days was to rush fraternities. And I got rejected by all the fraternities on campus. But it was, as I always say, the food wasn't very good at the university. It was much better than it was at the orphanage. So I'm sure. Living with 3 or 4 other guys. I lived with only one other roommate. So things were much better. And I did very well in my first year. I played baseball and basketball and did well in my courses and bought myself a tweed jacket and got a haircut and ended up being pledged by all the fraternities in the second year. And I did very well at the university. By the end of my tour there, I was in the Men's Honorary Society. I did just about everything you could do on campus. So that was I could see the golden ring after 4 years there. It was really transformational. Okay. And so three of my messages is one, anything's possible. I'm proof of that. Education is the solution to almost everything, if not everything. And the second is never be a victim. Use the energy for being a victim to find out what's next. And that's what I've done for most of my life.
Okay. And let me ask you about your major that you decided at Rochester. Did you stick with chemical engineering or did you?
Well, I took chemical engineering because those days to be an chemical engineer, you get a job. And that was very important to me. I was also very good at math and science, and I like chemistry. And I went in the Navy. I owed them 3 years for the scholarship, almost stayed. But toward the end of my career, I decided I would pursue it. I worked hard to get this engineering degree. I was going to try to find out what it was all about. Sent out 40 resumes, got 2 job offers, one in Lexington, Kentucky to be a assistant plant manager, and one in Wilmington, Delaware to be an applications research engineer in something brand new called plastics. I was in plastics 5 years before Dustin Hoffman.
Okay.
So I spent a year with Hercules, had a wonderful time as an engineer. I went to Wharton Business School at night because I was thinking about business. I had taken business courses while I was in the Navy from the University of California. And I found that business was something I had to get because I found that engineering was good. I liked it, but I found it really wasn't a long-term career for me. Many reasons, which I can articulate if you like. But I had a buddy from University of Rochester who we were chemical engineers together. We were naval officers together. I went to his house at Christmas time when I had no place to go. And he said, you got to come to this place called Harvard Business School. I said, Dick, I don't have the grades and I don't have the money. He said, give it a try. So I basically applied and somehow, the long story, I got in and went up there with just enough money for the first year's tuition. But they lent me a little money to live on and helped me pay for my second year tuition. And it was totally transformational because I found my passion, which was basically the business, the putting of people together. In fact, I found my passion at the university. In my junior year, I decided to create a humor magazine, which was Nobody was in favor. The president was against it. The provost was against it. The librarian was against it. But I found putting people together to build a product or start a program or solve a problem really excited me. That was a passion I had. And I got a terrific kick out of helping people do better than they thought they could. And when I applied that at the Harvard Business School, I found that this is the thing I wanted to do. I wanted to be a manager, and I would give up other things to do that. That's where I made a pivot from engineering to business at that point in time, then from business actually to the financial world. Because at Harvard, I didn't take any securities courses at all. But when I got out of school, I was all set to go to Wall Street as an investment banker, and I had to go to, this is in the book, my autobiography. I went out on a lark because I had to be in a wedding in San Francisco and went to a mutual fund company. Nobody went to mutual fund companies in those days. But this was a wonderful company, a kind of, it was very old, but very small. And it was exciting because within 2 or 3 months, you'd be on the road, doing your calling on companies and so forth. So I don't know why they hired me, but they did. And so I went into the financial business, and I spent, it was a very funny story because one of my very close friends invited me to be his best man in his wedding. And his little sister I had met 7 years before. And she turned out to be the bridesmaid of honor. And of course, the story is I ended up marrying her. So and that little larker going to California, I married the bridesmaid, went to work for the company for 10 years. So,
and I can see that coming when you started the story.
No, it's a really funny story because when her mother called me and said, well, would I take little Barbara to the wedding? And we met each other at Idlewild Airport. It wasn't called Kennedy in those days. She passed me about 3 times. I didn't recognize her. And so I had to pass the word for it. Finally got together with her to take her out to the wedding. And it was a very funny story because when I got back to Harvard, I called her up and I said, we'd like to come up for the weekend. She said she'd love to. I said, okay, I'll fix you up with some of your own age. And I did. Because she was 6 to 7 years younger than me. But the second time I invited her up, I took her out. So
okay.
And then the story was I was going to go to work on Wall Street, and she had taken a job as a teacher in Connecticut. And so I changed the last minute to take this job in California. She quit her job and applied and got a master's degree at the University of California, San Francisco. And we started. So she followed me out there. I ran after her, Cindy, until she caught me.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
And thank God, it's been 60 years or nearly 60 years. And she's been probably the most important thing I've ever done in my life. And without her, I wouldn't be here today. So
sounds like a wonderful life. And share with us how you were able to use those childhood disadvantages and make them turn it into a positive, because you had a lot of challenge.
Malcolm Gladwell said it very well. Disadvantages become advantages in many respects. Think about going to 5 different Catholic schoolyards. You become pretty adaptable. You can adapt to a new environment pretty well. I became and again, orphanages, there was a rites of passage. I entered this system with 50 people who were there, and you had to sort of find your place. So when you get to a business situation and someone says, can you take this on? You say, sure. Basically, you can do things. E.F. Hutton wanted to go to Japan. Nobody wanted to go to Japan. I raised my hand. I went to Japan for E.F. Hutton. Same thing with Lehman Brothers. I took a job that nobody would take because I could do things that I was very adaptable. Also, I was resilient. Resilience like a muscle. In my childhood, I got a chance to use it. It became quite strong. I also got a perseverance. And I got a certain self-confidence, having wiggled my way through all these difficult circumstances. Little guy on your shoulder that said, you can do it. Very important, I think, that you got some negatives out of that as well. You don't ever get away with 100%. I was quite angry as a young man because I kept asking myself, why me? It took me a long time in my life to rid myself of that anger. But I was annoyed. Why should I be an orphan? By the way, when you were an orphan those days, you wore it right on your forehead. I mean, most of the mothers there wouldn't want you to go out with their daughters and so on and so forth. It wasn't like
because they wanted to know who your people were, right?
Exactly. But all these disadvantages become advantages. And I grew up took my kids up in a very fine community called Greenwich, Connecticut. When I voiced these things about disadvantages, they said, well, what can we do? I said, well, send your kids to Outward Bound. Send them to Knowles.
Oh.
Make them work in the summertime in a mental hospital, or just send them someplace where they're on their own. My grandson went to Knowles and he spent 60 days with Knowles in Alaska, and it was 30 days in the rain, and that teaches you about life's not so simple. So I think those are the kinds of, in fact, one of the problems we have, I was interviewed the other day about a woman asking about Gen Z. One of the problems with Gen Z is they haven't had much difficulty. They had to overcome very many things. It's hard. I even came to the conclusion that in many respects, the COVID turned out to make life a lot easier. You didn't have to get in your suit every morning, get on a train and go to work anymore. You started operating in your pajamas. And so that made actually much easier. I run a golf course up in Nantucket. I'm the lead director, supposedly. And during COVID, on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in the afternoon, which is normally empty, it was full. So life was a little easier during COVID for those people. And don't tell me about increase in productivity. They weren't working very hard there between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the afternoon on a golf course. So anyway, long answer, short question. Sorry.
That's okay. I do agree. And I'm going to assume, and maybe that's wrong, but that makes me think that the reason you wrote this Island of the Four Ps was to address that. Maybe
that's exactly it.
Okay.
I want to develop a vocabulary that someone can use with their inner voice, which is your only constant, that basically allow you to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's talk about your book some more. So why did you decide to call it The Four Ps? How did you come up with the inspiration first? Because, you could just write a textbook, right?
Right.
You decided to do a fable.
Well, I decided to do a fable because I felt that all through my life that fables communicate ideas in a better way. They're more digestible. They're not teachy. They're not preachy. You communicate an idea through a fable much more easily. And by the way, a fable traps you into doing your own thinking. As you read my book, you will find that you will start thinking about yourself rather than what's written on the page. And you look at great fables, you want to argue, you can argue the Bible is just a group of fables. Gulliver's Travels, Don Quixote, each one of them had a message. Who Might Cheese, a really simple story, sold 20 million copies and changed people's lives because it basically, the other two constants are your inner voice and change. And all Who Might Cheese was saying to, there's change and you have to adapt to it. And of course, it's now even more prevalent than it was in those days. So I decided to write a fable, like Who Might Cheese, because I thought that was an interesting way to communicate to young people. In fact, there's one of the organizations I work with now, and I'm hoping it comes out. They're looking at making a video game out of it. It'll be the first video game where nobody gets shot.
Yeah, Grand Theft Auto and whatever. Yeah.
It really traps you. It traps you in your own thinking because as you read the book, you start living like these two characters. You'll go to the village of passions and you'll look around at these different things and say, I'm good. I like this, but I'm not good at it. I like this. Maybe this is something I should pursue. And one of my real messages is these monikers, these names they put on things like banker and analyst and engineer. And those two jobs I had were so totally different. One, I was going to be a manager of a plant while I was operating and so forth. The other one, I was going to be experimenting with a new product, both called engineers.
Yeah.
The same thing, investment banker, you had this vision of this person, but the guy I was interviewing said, you're an eagle if you're an investment banker. And you spent in those days 4 or 5 years in a dungeon working for somebody. An analyst was a gopher. But in those days, after 3 months, you're on the road. So these definitions they make of jobs, what I tell young people to do is try to understand exactly what you do physically Monday morning.
And have you, because you're so closely related to the university, and I don't know how much you're keyed in to keeping track of the students, or they are after they leave, but I know that from a lot of the research and reading that I do, just to kind of keep up with what's going on in the job market, is companies now, especially, the managers are talking about how unprepared Gen Z is. They don't understand what a work ethic is. They want to shop online during the day. They're on their phones. They're doing this, they're doing that. And they really they're not being a value add. You have to spend too much time with them. So in your opinion, because you have been in business so long, I know this book would be a great help to them if they had it with the guys that are in the workforce now don't have. They're past that. How do you think employers can approach that issue of helping these young people assimilate into the workplace more easily and helping them understand what's expected of them?
Well, that's one of the problems. Very large companies, need lots of people. It's really to find a person who's going to be value add for you. You got to spend a lot of time dragging out of that person. Do they have a passion? Are they interested in what you are doing? I turn that around. If you're interviewing a company, how do you really get the job? It's basically knowing the company as well as the person interviewing you.
Have to do your research, yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, the interviewer should see that. And if the person is not really doesn't know the company, doesn't know the job, doesn't know the environment that the company is in, what's happening in that company's environment? Is it an automobile company that has been going into electrical vehicles or not? Is it an oil company that's also spending time in the green area? Now also understand the interviewer. And there should today in the world, you can almost find out anything about anybody. One of my schools that I was taking on my project, I wanted to find out about the director of admissions. And I punched up perplexity, and it came out a whole business about what she had done, who she was, and so forth. So when I talked to her, I got to a second level right away. The interviewer, and I do blame companies for this, they're not finding people that are really interested in what they're doing. They have to hire a lot of people and take them on. Now, a lot of companies are very serious. The very serious companies do much, much better. And I hear this from everybody. And by the way, there's a whole differentiation between a college graduate and the what I call the professionals, the nurses, the marine engineers. There were no riots at the Keys Community College. There weren't any. There weren't any at the Nantucket High School, which 25 scholarship students every year from my golf club from that high school. There were no riots. These people want jobs. They want to really work. I mean, our scholarship students, they're just unbelievable. One of the young ladies that we gave a scholarship last year went to Harvard from Nantucket, and I met her. And she's taking just unbelievable courses. She's enthusiastic. She's working her tail off. So it's just a section of Gen Z that's basically in the wrong place or just had it too easy for too long. And by the way, the phone it is a total distraction, and it makes things seem a lot easier. There's a lot of negatives, but it's like everything else in every society. At certain points in time, you have to deal with these kinds of things, and we've jumped ahead quite a bit, and we haven't absorbed it yet. But I think it's only part of Gen Z. It's part of I'm involved with the Keys Community College down here. These kids really want a job; they want to work. So it's a college-educated kid that gets in the wrong place that is a real Gen Z person. That you're talking about, I think.
I want to make a comment about just companies in general. The companies that I've worked for, and I spent the last 3 years, I was in recruiting for well over 25 years. So I remember where it was just get a body, right? Just get a body, put them in the seat. And I remember when companies trained their people, right? They were willing to train you. Then around 2009, 10, 11, after that, it changed. The companies, because of the economy and all that, they were no longer training. They wanted you to come in and be ready to hit the ground running. And so just in the course of my work, I've seen the hiring ethic change. And the companies that I worked for, if you didn't do your research, if you didn't know what the company was about, you had to do your research. And you had to be really sincere about because we were going to vet you. I was the first vetter, because I wouldn't even send people to the hiring manager if they didn't meet certain criteria. And I wasn't testing them on their work skills. I was testing them on why did they want to work there. So yeah, good companies do that. And, they're very careful with vetting you out. And they do back references on top of the references that people give you. So yeah, there are companies that really do care about the people. And those are the companies you want to work for.
That's it. It's, when I interviewed, I probably hired 1,000 people in my day. I would ask some, what do they want to do? And someone would come and say, I want to be in the financial business. The interview was over right away because they came to me and said, I would like to be an analyst for the telecom business in northern China because they knew that I had that job as an opening. Then I would say, okay, he or she has done her homework. But they want to be in the financial business, don't bother me. I want you to decide what you want to do and come and tell me and make sure you paid attention to what I need. And if they can do that, that's fine. And I tell young people, no matter what, when you go for an interview, your business is to get the job. Then you can walk away and say, maybe I don't want it. And I go back to my own experience with Exxon. The guy said to me, your span of attention is too short. You're the kind of person that, wouldn't be good for Exxon. Well, I spent the next 2 hours convincing him I was. Like, it was a particular job of moving cargoes around the world. And when I got out in the street after the interview, and he offered me the job, by the way, I said, it's not for me. But I put the hat on. I wore that hat, decided, and if I didn't try to get the job, I never would have been able to figure out whether I would really take that job or not. And that was very important because that put that job in this category, and I should never go in that category again because I know I've made that decision. Kids don't do that. By the way, there's no, again, training at most schools either that train them. And again, that's a different level. In Bridgeport, there's a group called Connect Us. These high school kids show up at 4:00 after a full day of school and spend 2 hours writing resumes, doing mock interviews, studying what they want to do. I was at Bridgeport to talk to these kids. Very exciting group of kids. So
nice.
There's a level of this Gen Z problem, but there's another level down here, which is still, trying to make a living and trying to make a life.
And they're motivated because they want to change their circumstances. But if you have it,
right. Well, that's the whole problem. If you start, you're too comfortable. 40 years, we've been basically too comfortable. I'm reading David Kennedy's book, 1929 and 1945. That was really a tough period. I mean,
exactly. There's a reason my parents save stuff, because you never know when you needed it and you may not have had the money for it. So it's a different way of living, just a different way of living.
Markowitz's lowest level of needs, food and shelter, they don't even think about that anymore. And our parents did that. So it's, for 40 years, except for 9/11, really haven't had too many crises. And as I said, I looked at COVID originally as a crisis. The more I study it, it was actually, a very, everybody got a $600 check and you stayed home.
But there were those, I'm sure, that weren't happy with it. Let's talk some more about the book because I want you to break down. I highlighted, anytime I read anything, I highlight, but I marked a couple of sections in the book and I'd like you to talk a little bit about it. So the first one I marked was when Marcus asks Archimedes, it's not Archimedes. It says the woman explained that there are about the passions. How many kinds of passions are there? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think there are passions basically as a continuum, and it's an overused word. It's your likes and your dislikes, your strengths and weaknesses, your talents, and it's also contextual. I mean, in New York City or any other place in America is different than being in Kiev today. You have different passions. And by the way, passions at different times. I had a passion to run a company, and I started too early, and I did run a company as a 30-year-old, and I failed. Early failure is a gift. And I went back into the system and had to go back and learn how to have passions for other things to put in place so someday I could run a company. I didn't even go way back. And when I wanted to be a businessman, one of the things I really didn't like was accounting. And I had to spend a lot of time to understand accounting. I had to delay the gratification of getting where I wanted to go. I had to have a passion for accounting. So if you don't have a passion for accounting and really understand what's going on with the numbers, you really can't run a company. But it never really interested me. In fact, that as soon as I got to a certain position in the business world, I hired someone who was in charge of that and got it out of my system.
But you still know.
But I had to understand it.
Yeah.
So I had. By the way, if you don't have a passion for accounting, it's really almost hard. It's impossible. So you direct your passion toward things you need in order to get where you're going. So passion. By the way, passions change. Just for fun, if you want. in high school, I feel the first time you get real passion is about, the ice cream truck driver and the astronaut thing. You get done with that somewhere in 15, 18, you start to, I had a passion for baseball, basketball, math, science, and girls. Those were my 5 passions when I was in high school. When at the college, the math and science morphed into engineering. Actually, it took a little sojourn into physics. That's why I always tell people, these things they call things, you should go into them. In my sophomore year, I was an engineer, but I took advanced physics course because I thought I might be a physicist. And I got in and I realized it wasn't for me. These weren't my people. They were very different. They were very much more serious than I was about their studies. And I was much more a people person. And I got out of there after getting a D+ and back into engineering. So I think try things out is very, very, very important. So my math and science morphed into engineering. My baseball and basketball after freshman year morphed into extracurricular activities. And that ended up being really something that I found really excited me. And this idea of starting a humor magazine or putting people together. I was the chairman of the engineering council. I was the chairman of the finance board. I did a lot of different things. I kept myself very busy because with that, I didn't have to think about my past. I look back at that as I was overly busy. I was even social chair of my fraternity, which was crazy and so forth. But I did a lot of things to keep myself busy, but I found that was my passion. I enjoyed this kind of experience. And so my passion. Now, look what's happening now. I moved from a passion basically of running companies and being in the financial business. Now a passion of communicating ideas. And so completely, I had to learn very different kinds of skills in order to do that. And I have a great passion for that because I really think that's what's left in my life is to help young people make better decisions.
That's wonderful.
They
need it.
They need it. They need it. And I have a secondary passion. I really want to sponsor what I call a non-college education. I think there are a whole flock of people who'll be very happy being plumbers and electricians and so forth and carpenters and HVAC people. And we have a young fellow at the country club, at the golf club that wanted to be a chef. And it cost $60,000 to go to Johnson Wells. We gave him a scholarship. He could not have been happier. He loved making food. And that's, you're on your way there. So
yeah. Everybody, we're all built differently, right?
But that's and passions. They not only change, but there's a continuum. There's a lot of intense passion, and then there's a sort of minor passions. And I think that, but you sort those things, and then you find you can pursue your passion at some point in time. And I say sometimes it runs out. Mine did run out. The Wall Street to me, it's not as interesting as well before. But when I was in it, I couldn't wait to get to work in the morning.
Yeah. And if you have that feeling about whatever it is you're doing, you're going to be successful at it.
It's the cliche that if you love your work, you'll never work.
Well, I love what I was doing when I was doing. So I went to school to be a teacher and I taught for a while, but then jobs dried up. So I ended up working in business, right? Somehow I shifted around into HR and became a recruiter. And I really loved it because I had the people connection. You're more independent as a recruiter because you have to figure out how you're going to fill this job and where you're going to go find people and then talk to them, vet them and all of that. So,
so you found out who you were. You liked working alone. You liked having your own responsibility. You probably, the HR job, the recruiting job brought together all of your passions basically in one place.
It did. And taught me new ones because I never really, there's a certain, I don't want to call it sales, but there's a certain level of persuasion that you use in recruiting when you were talking about the company and, you're making it appeal to the candidate after you find out what's important to them. Right. So yeah, it was very interesting. And I liked it too, because every time I got a new job or I changed industries, I learned something new. So, there was an educational piece to it. And then, and
I bet you there was what I call a consummation piece. When you actually landed someone in a job, you felt very satisfied and fulfilled. And some people don't need that. No, they need it maybe once or twice in their life, but other people need it on a regular basis. And I was kind of one of those people. I could put people in a job, and I would then go back a month later and say, "How you doing?" and so forth. Mm-hmm. I created companies. That's what really excited me. And
yeah. So you created companies, and I helped shape them.
That's exactly right. No, that's it. My roommate worked for Heydrich and Struggles. He worked for, I think he worked for Heydrich and Struggles for all his life. And he's still around. We were roommates at Harvard, and we lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. He said we were three feet apart for 2 years and a mile apart for 35 years.
Well, funny. You two were meant to be. Talk a little bit about setting priorities.
That's the key in my mind, is basically figuring out what to do next and setting those priorities. And I recommend strongly that people at least once a year do a dive into those priorities. Do you have priorities? And are you pursuing them? Are you allocating the time for them? By the way, priorities aren't necessarily business things. Have you spent enough time with your wife? Have you spent enough time with children?
With your kids.
I don't believe in balance. I believe that the idea of being balanced is ridiculous. You're always out of balance, because in order to be successful, you have to focus. So if you focus on work, then you're neglecting your family and yourself and community. But you have to do that for a while. And yet, I mean, the concept of having harmony between self, family, work, and community is what you're trying to perceive. But on a regular basis, you got to say, let's look at these things. Where am I allocating my time? Am I satisfied with that? For example, young people have to spend much more time on self until they get a job. Then they spend more time work. Then they got to weave family in. You can leave community, most people, to a little bit later on in life. Some people start earlier. I started kind of midlife. I started it when I was chairman of the board of trustees of the local school. But then I had to focus on that. And that's why when I quit my job in 2008, I was running a hedge fund, making pretty good money. And I quit it, closed it, became the chairman of the board of trustees. Because in order to focus on community, which is, the chairman of the board is a bigger job than even I thought it was. I made 70 trips in 8 years to Rochester.
Wow.
And we had almost every problem you could think of during that period of time. But I had to decrease my focus on work and bring up my focus on the community side. And I didn't need much focus on self. I worked most of my life on self. I knew myself pretty well, my weaknesses and my strengths and so forth. Family was in pretty good shape because they were all older by then. See, that's the kind of thing I look at. And that's what I want people to start to think about. And I think if you focus on this, you got a better chance of making it through.
Sure enough. I really like the way your book is set up. I think you probably have already done this. It lends itself well to, I think when we talked the first time, you were working on the workbook to it, right? For the Island of the Four Ps. I really like the way it's set up with the questions in the back of each section. I'm just going to find one if I can. When we were just talking about the villager principles, basically, but I know that you have questions that you ask at the end of some of the key ideas and questions. Here we go. I just find, I'm looking at the villager partners. I just think that's really good because sometimes, depending on how you read and approach it, the concepts that you get, if you stop and you come back and read, you kind of lose it a little. And this is a great refresher. It makes you go back and think about it. So I think that's really good.
Thank you. No, I did. This is the new. I'm sending this out to schools now. It's a template for a course taught to freshmen in college, and to me, it's based on the 4 Ps and based on the book. And I think if people keep going back to the 4 Ps, they will basically make much better decisions. And also, they'll give them a better chance of testing the right things. I think college basically is a place where you can fail and pick yourself up very easily. And there are so many disciplines you can test yourself in many universities or schools. And so I'm pitching that pretty hard on this thing because I think you can change lives. People can get out of school both with a diploma and what I call a life design or a roadmap for life.
I think that's the piece that's missing. And then even just from a practical standpoint, when I worked for an HMO, I was hiring nurses, and I was at the time that there was a nursing shortage. And we would get everybody was fighting for the graduates, right? Because we needed people that had the basics. But the way that the system was set up, whatever discipline they decided to go into or area, whether it was being a PD nurse or being a med surg or being a surgical nurse, whatever it was, or maybe for the ICU, they had to do a training program and they had a preceptor. that worked with them. So you came out of school and you went right back to school, but in the environment. And one of the things that I thought was very smart of our head nurse, I forget what her title was, we weren't getting what we needed, or she wasn't getting what she needed. She decided to call in all the schools and meet with them and tell them what was missing so that they could go back and change their curriculum. And I think more of that needs to happen in today's world, where there's communication between business world and educational world, where it gets more focused and kids are coming out. I shouldn't say kids, students are coming out with an education that's more focused to where business is right now. What's going to make them valuable?
There's a very easy word. It's called experiential. If you're familiar with Northeastern, each one of those kids they got out of 5 years or 4 years of college. They've had 3 or 4 jobs. And the school does that. It's a 5-year program, and they spend, that extra year going to different businesses and so forth. I'm involved.
Oh, yeah. Internships, right? Internships,
yeah. Where really, you get a chance to really feel for that job. But you said something earlier, which is very important. Companies when I got out of school, you went into a training program, either General Electric or Citibank, and you spent a year going to different jobs in that particular company. And by the end of the year, you could figure out, and they could figure out what you were best at, if anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, businesses don't really want to do so much to that degree anymore. Ed, would you talk about the methods that you use to find mentors and why you feel that they're important?
Mentors are vital. I mean, I kid about this fact, but when I was on Wall Street, I found someone who was about 10 years older than I was, named Wally. And whenever I made a decision or I had a difficult problem, I'd call Wally up. And Wally basically had been there, done that. He basically plowed the field before me. Okay. People ask me about mentors. There's a couple things about mentors. First of all, the most important thing about a mentor in my mind is the care. If the person really doesn't care, if it just sort of, I'll talk to, you
got signed up in a company program. Yeah. You don't really care.
You have to care. The second one is the person has to be a listener, because what you're mentoring, you have to know. And the only way you're going to know that is to really listen and do not too much talk in the beginning. And the third, the best mentors that I've had or I've seen is people who have done the things that the person who's being mentored is going to do. That person has been there, done that. Wally was on Wall Street. He ran a firm. He was with a firm that went under. He went to another firm. He did a great job. He was a very bright guy. He was also very big in a number of charitable activities. He was a guy I could talk to. And he basically mentored me. And in college, I had a professor, my freshman professor in mechanical drawing, that mentored me all through the school. He took a liking to me, and I could talk to Oscar. His name was Oscar Miner. And I could talk to him all the way through about almost anything. So I think it's vital. This has been proven out. As a man named, I think his name was Ryder, he was at Harvard. He went to Houston, and he took control of about half a dozen or more underperforming high schools. And he put an ad in the paper to hire mentors, and he got unbelievable response. And he put these mentors to work, and sure enough, they turned these high schools around. And where are you located?
I'm in California.
Oh, you're in California.
Yeah.
Well, in Boston, there's a group called Wiley, and wonderful woman, who basically started about 5-6 years ago with 5 students. And she goes to the schools, and the schools who give scholarships get some of their kids to go to Wiley, and Wiley basically provides a counselor. That student must talk to the counselor once a week, just like you talk to your parents. And so this seemed like overdone. On the other hand, during COVID, these kids had no place to go. They're all foster kids. So this now like she has 75 students in places like MIT, and she counsels. These kids don't flunk out, don't flunk out academically. They flunk out socially. And so having these counselors is very important. They're basically mentors. So having a mentor, he's got to really care. She's got to care. Second of all, you've got to listen. And third of all, if you've been in the place where that person is going, you got a better chance of really helping them. Because as you know, some environments are so different. Take the difference between a nonprofit and Wall Street. You're just totally different worlds. And I can argue to that because I lived on Wall Street, and then was involved in the university. The kind of people you hire and the kind of people who do the best job, they're totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different orientation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Ed, before we go, would you tell the listeners where they can find your books?
Well, there's bad things about my name. It's hard to pronounce. Everybody wants to make it Hajim. It's really Hajim, but it's very unusual. Therefore, if you just punch into Amazon, Ed Hajim, you'll get my 2 books. On the other hand, you can do www.edhajim.com, and you get my website, which is actually too robust. My publicist is a wonderful lady, and she's overdone it. So by being my website, man, I have to read my books, and therefore I won't sell any books. So. But it is both those cases. And in the website, you can also order my book. And if you happen to order it and you happen to read it, I want to thank you ahead of time. And I wish you would send a short review and a rating to Amazon. Therefore, it'll make my publisher happy. But so far, I've been very lucky. I've sold 20,000 copies of the 2 books, and my publisher tells me that's a lot. I don't know if it is or it isn't, but
I don't have a measure of that. You only hear about I sold over 1 million copies.
Yeah, 1 million, exactly right. And
extreme, you don't know.
The average sale is about 800 or something like that. But I'm getting responses though. People call me, and one woman called me and said their daughter basically was confused and didn't know what to do. She read my book. Now she's a freshman at Notre Dame. So this was a couple of years ago, and I'm getting the feedback I need to keep me going. And I'm hoping this course catches on, and I have a whole new path to follow. I mean, I think that's one of the things that, pivot and then go into something, and you'll find many paths in that particular pivot. And I think that's what's going to happen to the young people today. They're going to live to 100 because of the change. They're going to have to pivot a number of times.
Mm-hmm. I've already pivoted several times in my
career. You're a perfect example. And if you didn't, you could get left behind. I mean, I always use the example of the record business. We had black records, then you had cassettes, then you had discs, and now it's in this thing called a phone. Mm-hmm. So
MP3s, download.
And so things are going to change much more rapidly in the future.
Yes, because
AI is just the internet was human being times 10, and the internet is the human being times 1,000. So it's really a whole new change that's going to occur. And I think that's one of the things we have to do. But anyway, if you find my book and you like it, thank you very much for reading it and following it. You can listen to it too. The woman who did the 4 Ps put 6 voices into it, and it can be listened in 2.5 hours. So it's kind of fun.
Okay. I like the book.
Now you like books. Because I have a highlighter too. I think you and I have a lot in common.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you.
All my pleasure. And I wish everything, and as we say when I end all my conversations, may the force be with you.
Absolutely. It is. Always with me. Take care, Ed.
Thank you very much. Have a great day and a great year.
You too. Bye-bye. That's a wrap. And thank you for supporting me by tuning in. Now, do you need a resume that gets noticed? Want to know how to answer those really tough interview questions and shine? Maybe it's time for you to do a career pivot. Don't worry, I can help you. Schedule a free call with me at www.insidethiscareerclub.com. I'm looking forward to talking to you about it. Now, let's speak a blessing over you. Your future is unlimited and it's bright. But remember, nothing happens without your active participation. Stay positive and believe that success is looking for you. Open up and receive it. Stay in it to win it. Until next time, take care.